Serious. Drug dealers of Reddit. Have you ever called CPS on a client? If so, what's the story? Story 1. This was a long time ago, and I've since gotten clean and started my own family. But there was a girl I knew who was homeless with her newborn son. On Easter weekend, I was walking on this trail to go meet with some people to sell them a sack. It started raining, and that, of course, made me mad. There are these bridges that cross over the top of the trail, and lots of kids gather and smoke or get spun under the bridges. And that's where I found her. She was passed out drunk with some random guy under the bridge, while her newborn babysat was strapped in his car seat in the rain. He wasn't under the bridge. He was crying, and he looked dirty. I didn't have any children at this point, but I panicked seeing the little guy. I grabbed him, dropped all the stuff I was supposed to be selling, and walked off the trail and up the couple blocks to the police station. I told them what happened and where I'd found him. Child Protective Services took him and he ended up getting adopted. Story 2. I used to deal way back when I was a hot mess in an extremely abusive relationship. I called Child Protective Services on not only one person, but 6. The one that sticks with me the most though, not only because of the severity but because I called twice, was this couple who used to pick me up from at a laundromat and we ended up seeing each other often enough. I felt okay to go to their place. I was so freaking floored when I stepped through that door. I kid you not. They had taken up all the carpeting in the house and had torn down the walls to get at the copper wiring and pipes. They had no electricity or running water. There was nothing in that house except for some sleeping bags in what used to be the living room. And then I noticed a nest of blankets with bright blue eyes peering at me over the pile and realized that there was a toddler and a small child no more than 5. Until this point, I'd never seen or heard them talk about having kids. The poor kids were filthy and obviously malnourished. The house stunk of mess so badly that I gagged. I couldn't believe it. I guess the look of shock was super apparent in my face because the dad said they were squatting and introduced me to their kids. I made some small talk and then left. The phone was ringing for CPS before I closed my car door. I gave them the address and let them know the conditions of the home, and they were squatting with 2 small children. Gave the names of the parents as I knew them and the names of the kids. They ended up going to jail for squatting, and the kids went to live with a relative. They ended up contacting me back to sell to them after they were bailed out of jail and I never responded. However, the guy I was with at the time ended up selling to them and they were living in a field in a tent with the kids. I got into a huge fight with my boyfriend over it and was so disgusted he still sold to them. They ended up calling CPS on them again. From what I heard from other people that knew them, the kids were taken permanently after that, and about a year later, the mom ended up going to prison for attempted murder, and the dad went to prison for check fraud some weeks after that. Story 3. I'm not a dealer, but I called CPS on my sister. She smoked a lot of not a huge deal, but one day when I was picking them up to come to my house, she was on the floor smoking a bowl with him right next to her. She always complained that he never slept, but the first night he was at my house, he fell asleep with no issue and did perfectly all week long. For the first 17 weeks of her pregnancy, she was high and told the doctors so it's frustrating that she got past that. She called me one day because they had been to do a wellness check, so I went to pick the baby up, 8 months old. The house was freaking disgusting. I'd never seen anything like it. There were piles of trash bags filled with diapers and rotting food. Counters covering the floors when I sat down felt nasty. The baby was in only a diaper, normal for his age, but all of his clothes were dirty. She packed a bag for him to stay the night with me. He had multiple patches of ringworm, one the size of a quarter, and his bag, clothes, and car seat were filled with cockroaches. My husband swears up and down he found bed bugs in the baby's car seat. We threw the car seat away and washed all of his clothes, then went and bought him a new car seat. Bought one for my house and a new one for her. We had the baby for a week and CPS never showed back up, so she asked for him back. We didn't have any signed statements saying she gave us permission to take him, so we were worried if we said no, she'd try and get us for kidnapping, so we gave him back. We took her to Walmart to buy soap, her car seat, and meds for the ringworm. The next day, I called CPS and filed as a mandated reporter and told them everything I knew. It's been 3 weeks and nothing has come out of it. I talked to my sister a little while ago and asked about the ringworm. She said it's still there, and that the doctors say there's nothing they can do, which I know is crap. Broke my heart to call, but I had to. It kills me knowing he's in that house, and I feel helpless. There's nothing else I can do. It's hard enough my husband and I have our own 5-month-old baby, but I would take that little boy in a heartbeat, because at least I know he'd be in a clean, safe house with people to take care of him. He doesn't deserve that. Story 4. Ah yes, back when I was younger, maybe 17. I got my first job at Domino's Pizza. One of my managers was a really scummy 24-year-old guy that looked like a troll and had astoundingly bad hygiene and also a crappy attitude, but sold good weed and bought me cigarettes. This was my first experience having older friends able to get me good stuff on demand like that. One day he hooked me up with a friend of his that was selling mushrooms. So I met with that guy and bought an ounce. Then walked to my manager's house to sell him some and also get some weed. So it turns out he and his similarly aged sister, who has a 1-year-old baby, both live in makeshift bedsheet bedrooms in the basement of the tiny house. They smoked inside, windows closed, cats everywhere, bugs everywhere, weird gross sour smells coming from all areas. Everything is gross. Their mom was home, but she was senile and addicted to painkillers, as well as the sister. So we did the trade downstairs, and when I went back upstairs, I went to the kitchen to throw some stuff away and I saw the baby in a high chair, eating a pack of cigarettes. He's just sitting there tearing them open and putting them in his mouth and spitting it out. I ran downstairs and told the sister, and she just started yelling, "Mom! Mom, get the baby!" a couple of times lazily, then gives up and goes back to just sitting there. It was surreal. I hadn't ever experienced such neglect and disgust from people. I left and waited 2 days to call Child Protective Services because I didn't want my manager to know it was me who called. I know the kids got taken away and she went to live with a different family member, or at least that's what I was told. Story 5. This is a sad story, but I'll tell it anyway because it was the past. There have been so many stories, but this one takes the cake. It's the reason I stopped selling and turned my life around. I must have been 16 or 17 at the time. I was in high school and also had a part-time job at Dairy Queen. On top of school and a regular job, I was also selling weed and cigarettes at school. At the time of this incident, I'd already been selling hard for about 1 or 2 years. Profit was pretty good. I'd say around $300 per day on average, which was great for my age. But I spent money as fast as it came. I was young and I was dumb. So as a DD selling rock and pants, I would use some addict's house to sell out of. I guess the cops would call these things shacks or projects. I'd be supplying the addict a cheaper price for the product so that I could use their house to sell out of. They would also refer a lot of other people to buy from me, or they would help sell for me in return for the product. So the incident is in this addict's house. He, about a 50-year-old man, has a girlfriend or partner or something like that. The girlfriend had a little boy, maybe the age of 3 or 4 or 5. At the time, I didn't know how to tell how old the kid was. I didn't ask either because I was ashamed of myself for not preventing his mother from using. This kid, though, I felt like he was my little brother in some way. I would cook for him when he was hungry, and his mom was always too messed up to do anything. One day I went to work at the shack. It was a regular day. I get into the house, get my products ready, weigh out the stuff, and bag them up. Knock on the bedroom door of the guy, homeowner. I see him sleeping. His girlfriend is also on the couch sleeping because she's always messed up. The kid is just sitting there watching TV. I make him some macaroni and cheese. Now I gotta wake up the guy because I need an update on what products he moved the day before. So I went into his room. I see his eyes are still open, white foam all over him like he overdosed. Now I'm in one of the biggest panics I've ever been in. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, I sit down with the kid and stay there until he finishes his mac and cheese, thinking about what I'm going to do next. His mom, sleeping behind me on the couch, is still alive, but has no idea what happened, or maybe she does. I don't know. I left the shack, drove about 2 blocks away, using the prepaid cell phone I have to call the police and report it. Sat in my car until the police showed up. From that day on, I'm anti-hard drug. I still wonder about the little kid. He's probably 16 now without a mom. Every time I see mac and cheese at the supermarket, I get this messed up feeling in my gut. And for the guy that died, I know I didn't kill him. I've accepted that. But could he have lived longer if I was never in his life? His life story was pretty amazing. He did cool things when he was young. He got into drugs when his mom passed away. He didn't have a dad though. One tip for anyone reading this: never judge a person on where they are in life, even if they are crackheads, as many people would say. Some people go through the most brutal situations and have no love and support to get on their feet. I'm glad I was able to be the man's friend before he died. And I know I treated the kid as a big brother or father, and I hope he remembers that part. Story 6. I had a dealer who I thought was alright at first. Came on a little strong, asking to play Destiny with me as we both had PS4. Eventually, I started going around to his house for a joint before going home with my bag. This was fine at first, but gradually became a bit of a living hell. He started screaming at his kids, they must have been 3 and 6, for anything. For walking into the room, for playing in another room, for making a loud noise, for asking a question. Even when they want a hug, he's shouting at them, and even when he gives one, he tells them to stop being stupid and stop crying. This abuse extended to his partner. She was half his size and thin as hell. Not unhealthy thin, but thin. It was just verbal, but calling her an idiot, screaming at her, and this low, angry tone he took with his kids, talking through his teeth and exploding at the end of the sentence. She hated it, you could tell, but she put up with it because she didn't work and needed to support the kids who she loved. One day he got so mad he held her against the wall and started choking her. I stood up and shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" He caught himself and backed away. She slumped to the floor crying, and he tried a pathetic attempt at damage control, telling her he's sorry. But it's her fault and telling me the same. I left there and then. Never went back. Called social services and gave them the address. I knew they had been before, but they wouldn't have seen it happening. Not too long after, the police were there arresting him for something. I assumed that they saw the weed or something and called him. I'm glad they did. I feel like I should have done something sooner, as the red flags began to raise, but there were unfortunately two things holding me back. One, I was the only person that came around for George, so he would know who called them. And two, I really wanted Bud. I was so bad about it, and I really spiraled knowing I was a slave to the addiction. Ultimately, that helped me kick it. Been clean for years now. Story 7. So I'm only posting because I've been clean and sober for 3.5 years now, and anything I say I have already been convicted for, and I've officially finished all of my legal issues. I have never officially called Child and Family Services, but I had this one mother who used to constantly call me for meth, and I had never been to her house before. I was a bit of a sketch bag and didn't trust anybody. But after a few months, I built a relationship with her where I felt at ease going to her house. When I went to go drop some off, it was child tax day. I never knew she was a mother. Normally not an issue for me, couldn't care less. I walked into the house and the smell was unbelievable. Cigarettes, sweat, poop, and piss. There was broken glass on the floor, 12-inch burn circles on the floor, poop on the floors, the TV was smashed, and the bathroom door was literally torn off and in the hallway. I had seen a little toddler that was walking around with no diaper on. He had his own poop all over him. He was so malnourished he was gray. The mother came to give me her money and I took the bag of meth I had put in my pocket. I told her to buy some diapers for her kid. I told her that she would have to find her dope somewhere else and walked away. A good friend of mine who had always tried to help me out was a social worker, and I told her who she was and where she lived and gave her some details so she could make a final decision. I'll always remember that kid. The last I heard, he had been taken away, and the mother was in jail. I wish him the best of luck in this cruel world. Story 8. I used to sell weed, X, and K around 20 years back, and I had a regular that would come to see me like clockwork every weekend. He seemed like an okay guy, excluding the drug, of course, but I can't really criticize here because I was a dealer. And after a while, his pickups turned into 5-minute chats and then to 30-minute stays. During a convo, he let slip that he had a son, a toddler, and that he looked after him every weekend. And that when he was at my joint picking up, his kid was in the car and the kid was in the back seat. He had a high-ace minivan, windowless, the whole time. And not only that, but because he didn't want to share a single bed with his kid and risk getting it urinated on, he made his kid sleep in the van outside. But it's okay because it was locked and parked in the backyard so the kid was safe. As soon as he let it slip, he was done as a customer. I told him to get the hell out and never come back, on the threat of a severe beating. He threatened to rat me out to the cops. I told him that my suppliers saw me as a decent source of income and wouldn't take it very well. He left. It rocked me so hard that I felt almost concussed. I honestly couldn't process how sterile and casual he was about it all, and I knew I had to tell CPS. So I called anonymously and said I lived on the street and could hear the kid crying from the van at night every weekend, and that I had seen him incoherent and smelling of weed during the day. I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to either him or his son, but it has stuck with me all this time, and I feel responsible for his actions in part because he did these things in pursuit of his drug. I eventually stopped dealing and got my life together the way I felt about this, and the realization that my actions affected people far further from me than I thought was a huge part of it. Nothing changes the fact that I contributed to that child's neglect and abuse, though. Willingly or not, it makes no difference, and it's only one of the ugly things I've done that I have to live with. Story 9. I did, many years ago. When I pushed, I did not deal in hard drugs only, THC, MDMA, and psychedelics. Well, I was at this woman's house because she was not only a client, but also the girlfriend of one of my best friends, so I was there often enough to see him. I consistently found myself and anyone else at the house left alone with a child. It seemed if anyone showed up, she would sneak out. Come to find out, she was doing methadone with the upstairs neighbors, and hell knows what else. I hate to know who that child was ever left alone with. She had been an on-again, off-again addict. Many times I witnessed that she would watch her toddler put cigarettes in her mouth from the ground, which I would take away from the baby, and she would laugh and say that it's not a big deal. I rode in her car a few times. I was a smoker at that time as well. I would get out of the car to light up and she would tell me that I could smoke in the car, but I refused because of the child in the back seat. When I was around, I would try my best to kind of steer her away from the child when she wanted to have a cigarette. It is something very specific that began to steer me clear of any tobacco use. She had a bug problem in her house, and she would spray bug killer in every single one of her daughter's toys to keep the bugs off them. I explained to her that her baby chews on her toys and bug killer can seriously harm her, and she again told me that it's not a big deal. She has seen her baby put worse things in her mouth and that it will toughen her up. I had enough. I'm the oldest of 9 kids and I nannied for several families for over a decade aside from mothering my own siblings. I know that a child can handle a lot, but there are so many things that she was doing that kept ringing off the danger bells in my head. I knew that if the child got sick or even died because of her carelessness, I would feel directly responsible for not doing anything about it. If you see something, say something, especially when it involves a child. My goal was not to have her child taken from her, and she never did, but for someone with authority to keep tabs on the child. I could not stand to be around her anymore, and it is within my nature to take on a caretaker role. But the relationship I had with those people was seriously damaging my mental state. I had nothing but fear and sorrow for that little girl. I lost a best friend by doing this, but the kid was worth more than a friend who could not see what his woman was doing right in front of him. Where they are now is even sadder, but I can't bring myself to dive into that. Story 10. When I was selling to her, the lady shook her crying baby in front of me. I wigged out, took the baby, and called 911 from my car. She didn't put up a fight until the cops came to arrest her. She tried to sue me for kidnapping. Definitely not the best strategy for me. I was 18 and addicted pretty badly, but when the baby saw a doctor under state care, he was covered in bruises, had a couple of burns, and had 2 broken ribs already. I'm convinced she would have killed him. He's 10 now and happy and thriving. The whole experience, the legal battle when she tried to have me charged with kidnapping, is how I got sober.